Oh no. Not this again, Officer Reynolds said with a thin smile, tilting his head as if already bored by her existence. He didn't even try to lower his voice. You expect us to believe that phone belongs to you? A few people nearby turned. Some slowed down. Some stopped completely. Reynolds stepped closer, two fingers casually pointing at the sleek smartphone in her hand, as though he were identifying stolen merchandise in a display case. That model costs more than most people make in a week, he continued, letting out a short laugh. Funny how these things keep ending up in the wrong hands. His partner circled slightly behind her, not touching, not yet, but close enough to signal control, close enough to humiliate. The black woman in the ruby-red blazer didn't step back, didn't protest, didn't explain. She simply watched them, the way someone watches a moment they know will soon regret itself. One officer extended his hand abruptly. Go ahead. Hand it over. Several phones were already recording. Someone whispered, "This is going to be bad." Because sometimes the loudest accusations collapse the fastest. If this story found you today, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you believe respect should never depend on stereotypes, consider subscribing, because what happened next left an entire street speechless. The afternoon light stretched across the polished glass buildings of downtown Chicago, casting long reflections that made the streets appear almost staged, as if the city itself were a carefully arranged set waiting for something important to unfold. People moved quickly along the sidewalks, coats shifting with the cool autumn breeze, heels tapping against concrete conversations blending into a constant hum that rarely paused for any one person. In a city where thousands of lives intersected every hour, most stories passed unnoticed. But some moments refused to remain ordinary. Naomi Carter walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned long ago that attention did not always mean respect. At 32 years old, she carried herself with calm precision, her posture straight, but never rigid, her movements measured without appearing rehearsed. She wore a tailored ruby-red blazer that contrasted elegantly against the neutral tones of the city, paired with dark-fitted trousers and low heels designed more for endurance than display. Her natural textured hair framed her face in soft curls, carefully maintained, but never overly styled, communicating professionalism without sacrificing authenticity. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes moved with awareness, absorbing details most people overlooked. She had just stepped out of a small specialty coffee shop, known among consultants and analysts who preferred quiet corners to loud corporate lounges. The receipt still rested in her bag, beside a slim silver laptop and a leather notebook filled with neat handwriting and coded reminders that would mean nothing to anyone else. Her phone, the object that would soon become the center of unwanted attention, sat lightly in her hand as she checked the time. 3:42 p.m. She had exactly 18 minutes before her next scheduled call. Naomi did not rush. She rarely did. Rushing suggested panic, and panic invited questions she did not always have the freedom to answer. A black SUV passed slowly along the curb, music low behind tinted windows. Across the street, a group of finance interns laughed too loudly, unaware of how easily confidence could be mistaken for certainty at their age. The city carried on in its usual rhythm, indifferent to the quiet calculations unfolding inside Naomi's mind. She worked as a technology consultant, at least according to the version of her life most people were allowed to see. Her clients included financial firms, logistics companies, and occasionally government departments requiring discrete upgrades to digital infrastructure. She specialized in mobile encryption protocols and secure communication environment skills, increasingly valuable in a world where information could be more powerful than currency. Her contracts were often short-term confidential and layered behind legal language that ensured only the necessary details were visible. What strangers noticed first, however, was not her expertise. It was the contrast. A black woman walking alone through a district where luxury storefronts displayed watches priced higher than annual salaries. A woman dressed with understated precision, carrying devices associated with executive privilege, a presence that unsettled those who unconsciously expected power to look different. Naomi had grown accustomed to these reactions. The lingering glance when she entered high-end hotels. The hesitation before someone asked whether she was in the right conference room. The subtle shift in tone when she spoke with authority instead of apology. She never confronted every assumption. She simply remembered. Because memory was a form of preparation. She paused briefly near the corner of Madison and Wabash, adjusting the strap of her bag as a notification appeared on her screen. A secure calendar reminder. She read it once, then dismissed it. Her pace remained steady, each step placed with quiet certainty. Behind her, the coffee shop door opened again. A woman in her late 50s stepped out, her expression distracted, one hand searching through an oversized designer handbag. Linda Whitmore had spent the past hour discussing a charity gala with colleagues who valued appearances as much as outcomes. Her jewelry reflected the afternoon light with deliberate brightness, each piece chosen to signal belonging in spaces that often measured worth through visible symbols. Linda stopped abruptly on the sidewalk, her brows tightening as her fingers moved faster through her bag. A small crease formed between her eyes. She searched again more urgently this time, shifting receipts and cosmetics aside with growing impatience. Her phone was not there. The device had been resting beside her coffee cup only moments earlier. Her gaze lifted quickly, scanning the people nearest to the entrance. Her attention settled on Naomi. There was no clear reason, no evidence, only the quiet, dangerous confidence of assumption. Naomi continued walking, unaware that within seconds her routine afternoon would transform into something far more public than she had intended. She did not see Linda's expression harden. She did not hear the sharp inhale that preceded accusation. She did not notice the way nearby conversations began to slow as subtle tension passed through the air like the first drop before a storm. A delivery truck shifted gears loudly at the intersection. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly, blending into the soundscape of a city accustomed to urgency. Naomi's phone remained in her hand, its smooth glass surface reflecting fragments of sky between skyscrapers. For a brief moment, everything remained ordinary. But ordinary moments often stand closest to disruption. And sometimes all it takes is a single assumption for an entire chain of events to begin moving in a direction no one expects. Linda Whitmore stepped forward, her voice already forming words shaped more by certainty than truth. Naomi sensed movement behind her. She turned slightly, and the first crack in the illusion of normalcy began to appear. "Excuse me. Miss you there?" The voice cut through the afternoon air with sharp urgency, drawing attention faster than the sound of the distant siren. Naomi paused mid-step, her hand still loosely holding her phone, and turned slowly toward the source of the call. Linda Whitmore was approaching quickly, her heels striking the pavement with clipped determination, her expression tight with agitation that had already hardened into accusation. "Yes," Naomi asked calmly, her tone neutral, neither defensive nor welcoming. Linda stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning Naomi from head to toe, in a way that felt less like observation and more like confirmation of something she had already decided must be true. Her lips pressed together before parting again, the words leaving her mouth without hesitation. "My phone is missing," Linda said, lifting her chin slightly. "And you were the last person standing near my table." Naomi blinked once, processing the statement carefully. "I'm sorry to hear that," she replied, "but I wasn't near your table." Linda gave a small, dismissive laugh, one that suggested patience was already exhausted. "I don't think this needs to be complicated," she said, gesturing toward the device in Naomi's hand. That looks exactly like mine. Naomi glanced briefly at her own phone, then back at Linda. Many phones look alike, she answered evenly. The tension between them began to draw attention. Two pedestrians slowed. A man exiting the coffee shop paused just long enough to sense conflict before deciding whether to involve himself or keep moving. The city thrived on curiosity, especially when certainty appeared on one side and composure on the other. Linda's voice rose slightly. I left it right on the table. When I went back inside to ask for the receipt, it was gone. Her eyes narrowed. You walked out right after. I walked out because I finished my coffee, Naomi said, her voice steady. That does not make me responsible for your phone. Linda shifted her bag on her shoulder, clearly frustrated that the exchange was not unfolding as quickly as she had expected. Look, she said, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. If you just return it now, I won't involve anyone else. Naomi felt the weight of several eyes on her. She had encountered similar situations before. Moments where assumptions appeared before facts, where the burden of explanation was placed upon her simply because someone else felt uncomfortable with coincidence. I'm not in possession of your property, Naomi said calmly. Linda exhaled sharply through her nose, the sound carrying impatience mixed with indignation. She looked around briefly, then lifted her hand and waved toward the street, signaling for attention she had already decided she was entitled to receive. Two uniformed police officers stood near the intersection, speaking with a parking enforcement agent. Linda raised her voice just enough to carry across the distance. Officer, excuse me, officer! The officers turned, their posture shifting automatically at the sound of urgency. Officer Daniel Reynolds, tall and broad-shouldered, began walking toward the scene with measured authority. His partner, Officer Grant Miller, followed half a step behind, scanning the surroundings with practiced habit. What seems to be the problem? Ma'am Reynolds asked, his tone professional, but already alert to the tension he sensed between the two women. Linda gestured toward Naomi immediately. My phone was taken from the table inside the cafe, she said, and she was the only person near me when I realized it was gone. Reynolds turned his gaze toward Naomi, his expression neutral, but attentive. Ma'am? He said. Do you mind telling me what happened from your perspective? Naomi met his eyes steadily. I purchased coffee, she said. I left the cafe. I have not taken anything that does not belong to me. Miller stepped slightly to the side, positioning himself in a way that subtly limited Naomi's ability to simply walk away. The movement was not aggressive, but it carried implication. Linda crossed her arms. That phone costs $1,200, she added quickly, as though price might influence credibility. Reynolds nodded slowly. Do you have proof of purchase for the device in your hand? He asked Naomi. Naomi did not react emotionally to the question. Instead, she spoke with quiet precision. Yes, she said. The receipt is in my email. I can show you. Miller extended his hand. We'll need to take a look at the phone. Naomi hesitated briefly, not out of fear, but calculation. The phone contained sensitive data, information that required controlled handling. But she also understood how refusal might appear. Before she could respond, Linda spoke again, her voice edged with restrained triumph. You see, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Reynolds tilted his head slightly. We're just verifying ownership, he said, though the firmness in his tone suggested the outcome already felt predictable to him. Naomi unlocked the screen deliberately, her movements unhurried, her composure unchanged. She turned the phone slightly so Reynolds could view the display without fully surrendering control of the device. My name is listed in the device registration, she said, and the serial number can be confirmed through the manufacturer database. Reynolds studied the screen for a moment, his brow tightening slightly as he considered the information presented. But Linda's presence behind him, combined with the growing audience of onlookers, created pressure to act decisively rather than patiently. Ma'am Miller said, we're going to need you to step over here while we sort this out. He gestured toward the patrol car parked along the curb. The implication was clear. Naomi could feel the shift in atmosphere. The curiosity of the crowd had transformed into anticipation. Some expected confrontation. Others expected confirmation of suspicion. Few expected complexity. She inhaled slowly, steadying her thoughts. "I am cooperating," she said, "but I would prefer this situation remain proportional." Reynolds gave a small nod that did not quite reach his eyes. "That depends on how quickly we clear things up." Linda watched silently, her earlier uncertainty replaced by visible confidence. The balance of control had already begun to tilt. And the afternoon that had started with routine precision now stood on the edge of escalation neither officer fully understood yet. Naomi stepped toward the patrol car, aware that perception often moved faster than truth. And sometimes perception caused damage long before truth had the opportunity to speak. Officer Reynolds rested one hand lightly on the edge of the patrol car. His posture relaxed in a way that suggested authority did not require effort. The late afternoon light reflected off the windshield, casting fractured lines across his uniform badge. Naomi stood beside the vehicle, composed her phone still in her hand, aware that every movement she made was now being watched not only by the officers, but by a growing half-circle of strangers who had quietly positioned themselves close enough to observe without appearing involved. "Go ahead and place the phone on the hood," Reynolds said, nodding toward the car. Naomi did not immediately move. "Officer," she said calmly, "this device contains confidential client information. I am willing to show proof of ownership, but I would prefer not to surrender physical control unless legally required." Reynolds gave a small smile that did not convey warmth. "Ma'am," he replied, "right now, we're investigating a reported theft. Procedure requires us to verify the property in question." Miller stepped slightly closer, his presence reinforcing the suggestion that compliance was expected, not negotiated. "It'll just take a minute," he added, though his tone implied time was not the primary factor being evaluated. Naomi slowly placed the phone on the hood of the patrol car, careful to ensure the screen dimmed automatically. She folded her hands loosely in front of her, maintaining posture that communicated cooperation without submission. Linda Whitmore remained a short distance away, arms crossed, chin raised slightly, as if she had already received confirmation that her concerns were justified. A few people near the coffee shop entrance whispered among themselves. One young man held his phone at chest level, pretending to check messages, while the camera lens pointed steadily toward the unfolding scene. Reynolds picked up the phone and examined its exterior. "New model," he remarked. "Not exactly something people misplace casually." Naomi's expression remained neutral. People misplace many things when distracted. Linda scoffed softly, loud enough to be heard. "I was distracted for less than a minute." Miller glanced at Naomi. "Do you mind explaining how long you were inside the cafe?" "Approximately 14 minutes, Naomi answered. "My order time is recorded on the receipt." Reynolds tapped the screen lightly, navigating the interface with unfamiliar caution. "You said you have proof of purchase?" "Yes," Naomi said. "The digital invoice is in my email. The device serial number will match the record." Reynolds nodded slowly, but did not immediately request the document. Instead, he glanced briefly toward Linda, then back to Naomi. The hesitation was subtle but noticeable. Sometimes Reynolds said people obtain devices through indirect means. Naomi recognized the implication immediately. "Indirect means still produce verifiable transaction histories," she replied evenly. Miller shifted his stance. "We're just trying to understand the situation." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Understanding generally requires evidence." The tension in the air sharpened. Linda's voice broke the silence. "Officer, I don't think we need a legal lecture. I simply want my property returned." Reynolds nodded reassuringly toward Linda before addressing Naomi again. "Ma'am, where did you purchase this phone? Directly from the manufacturer's online store?" Naomi answered. 3 weeks ago. And you have documentation confirming that, yes. Reynolds extended the phone slightly. Go ahead and show us. Naomi stepped forward, maintaining steady breathing as she reopened the screen and navigated through encrypted folders. She paused briefly before opening the email containing the purchase confirmation. The digital receipt displayed her name clearly, along with the device identification number. She turned the screen toward Reynolds. He studied the information carefully, his eyes scanning the details with increasing concentration. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his expression. Linda leaned forward slightly. That doesn't prove anything, she said quickly. People can alter emails. Naomi did not respond immediately. Instead, she tapped the screen once more, opening the manufacturer verification page, displaying the serial number tied directly to her registered account. This number can be confirmed through the company database, she said calmly. Miller leaned closer, reading silently. Reynolds inhaled slowly. Still, the hesitation remained. Well, Reynolds said, his tone measured, that does provide some information. Naomi studied his expression carefully. Some information. Linda stepped closer, her impatience no longer concealed. Officer, my phone disappeared within seconds of her leaving the table. I don't see how complicated this needs to be. Miller looked toward Linda. Ma'am, we are reviewing the details. Linda pressed her lips together, clearly unsatisfied with the pace. Reynolds handed the phone back to Naomi, but his posture remained guarded. We still need to verify a few things. Naomi accepted the device without visible reaction. What specifically? Whether another phone matching this description was reported stolen recently, Reynolds said. And whether there are any inconsistencies in the information provided. Naomi nodded once. You are free to verify. A faint murmur passed through the small crowd. Some appeared uncertain, now their earlier assumptions beginning to weaken under the presence of verifiable facts. But perception rarely shifts all at once. Linda's confidence faltered only slightly, but enough for her voice to lose a fraction of its earlier certainty. My phone had a protective case, she added. Black leather. Naomi held up her phone, revealing a matte graphite finish with no case. Linda hesitated. Reynolds noticed. Still, procedure had momentum now. Ma'am, Miller said to Naomi, we'd like you to remain here while we confirm these details. Naomi glanced briefly at the gathering onlookers, then back at the officers. Am I being detained? Reynolds answered carefully. We are conducting an investigation. That does not answer the question, Naomi replied. A pause followed. You are not under arrest, Reynolds said finally, but we ask that you remain present. The distinction was technical, but the implication was unmistakable. Naomi inclined her head slightly, signaling reluctant agreement. In the distance, traffic continued flowing. Conversations resumed in fragments, yet the small space surrounding the patrol car remained suspended in quiet tension. Because sometimes bias does not appear in loud declarations. Sometimes it reveals itself in hesitation, in doubt applied unevenly, in the quiet assumption that explanation must be earned rather than offered. And as Naomi stood beneath the fading autumn light, she understood that this situation was no longer about a missing phone. It had already become something else, something more difficult to correct once allowed to continue. The small crowd that had formed on the sidewalk no longer pretended not to watch. Conversations had slowed into murmurs, the kind that traveled quickly from one person to another without anyone claiming responsibility for the words. A cyclist paused near the curb, one foot resting on the pavement, curiosity outweighing whatever destination had previously seemed urgent. Someone across the street angled their phone carefully, pretending to scroll, while ensuring the camera captured everything unfolding beside the patrol car. Naomi stood still, her composure intact. Though the atmosphere around her had shifted from suspicion, into something heavier, a silent expectation that she must somehow justify her presence in a space where she had every right to stand. Officer Miller gestured politely but firmly toward the side of the vehicle. "We'd prefer if you stayed here while we confirm the details," he said. Naomi nodded once. "I have not attempted to leave." Reynolds rested both hands on his duty belt, his stance widening slightly, as though preparing for resistance that had not been offered. "Standard procedure," he said, though the repetition of the phrase seemed intended more for the audience than for Naomi herself. Linda Whitmore remained nearby, her arms folded tightly, fingers gripping the fabric of her coat sleeve. Her earlier certainty had softened slightly, but pride prevented any immediate retreat. Instead, she maintained the posture of someone unwilling to reconsider a conclusion once voiced publicly. "I know what I saw," Linda said quietly, though her voice carried clearly in the attentive silence. "My phone was there." "Then it wasn't." Naomi did not respond immediately. She understood that logic rarely penetrated conviction shaped by embarrassment. Linda did not want the phone merely found. She wanted her judgment validated. "May I ask?" Naomi said calmly whether anyone else was seated near your table. Linda hesitated. People were coming and going, so there were multiple individuals within proximity. "That doesn't change the timeline," Linda insisted. Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Timelines are often more complex than they appear." Reynolds exhaled slowly, his patience thinning as the exchange grew more deliberate than decisive. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Naomi, "we're still waiting on confirmation regarding the device serial number." "I understand," Naomi replied. Miller glanced briefly toward the crowd, then back to Naomi. "Do you have identification on you?" Naomi reached slowly into her bag, mindful that sudden movements could be misinterpreted. She produced a slim leather wallet and handed over her driver's license without comment. Miller examined the card carefully. "Naomi Carter," he read aloud. "Address matches the documentation on the device registration." Linda shifted her weight, her confidence now balancing uneasily between expectation and uncertainty. One of the onlookers spoke quietly to a friend. "This doesn't look like a theft situation." Another whispered, "They wouldn't be checking ID if it were obvious." Reynolds heard the comments, his jaw tightening slightly. Public perception could complicate even routine encounters. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, returning his attention to Naomi. "How long have you had this phone?" 23 days, Naomi answered. "You remember the exact number?" "Yes." Linda gave a short, incredulous laugh. "That seems rehearsed." Naomi met her gaze briefly. Accuracy often sounds rehearsed to those who prefer assumptions. The words were not aggressive, but they landed with quiet precision. Miller cleared his throat softly, attempting to maintain focus. "Do you have any record of the purchase available offline? In case network verification takes time?" Naomi opened her email again and displayed the original transaction confirmation, including the timestamp purchase location and device identification code. She enlarged the section containing the serial number. Miller compared the number displayed on the screen to the external identifier printed on the device packaging information stored digitally. "It matches," Miller said quietly. Reynolds nodded once, though his expression remained guarded. "We still need confirmation regarding the reported missing device." Linda's lips pressed together tightly. "I know what my phone looks like," Naomi spoke gently. "May I ask what model you purchased?" Linda hesitated. "The latest version." Reynolds turned slightly toward Linda. "Do you have the purchase receipt?" "It was in my email," Linda replied quickly. "I didn't think I needed to bring printed proof just to drink coffee." "That's understandable," Miller said. "But it would assist the process." Linda opened her handbag again, searching with increasing urgency. The earlier confidence in her movements had been replaced by tension. She scrolled through her phone records using a tablet retrieved from her bag, her expression tightening as she navigated folders. Meanwhile, the crowd continued observing. A teenager whispered, "They're still holding her here, even though the numbers match." Another voice responded, "People jump to conclusions too fast." Reynolds shifted his stance again, aware that every passing minute changed the narrative unfolding in public perception. Naomi remained composed, though internally she tracked the time carefully. Her scheduled call was approaching. More importantly, the device contained secure information requiring controlled access. Extended exposure increased unnecessary risk. "I have an appointment shortly," Naomi said calmly. "May I ask how much longer this verification process will require?" Reynolds glanced toward Miller, then toward Linda. "We're working as quickly as possible." Linda's voice returned, quieter now, but still defensive. "I know my phone didn't just disappear." Naomi nodded once. Devices are often misplaced in crowded environments. Linda looked up sharply. "Are you suggesting I lost it?" "I am suggesting that certainty sometimes arrives before evidence." The air felt heavier. Even the traffic noise seemed muted, because what had begun as accusation had now evolved into scrutiny not only of Naomi, but of the assumptions guiding the interaction itself. Reynolds' radio crackled softly at his shoulder, the static cutting through the tension, like a reminder that external factors were already beginning to intersect with the situation. He reached toward the device instinctively, and the moment before he answered felt longer than expected. Because sometimes the smallest interruptions introduce the largest consequences. The radio at Officer Reynolds' shoulder crackled again, the sound sharp enough to momentarily interrupt the quiet tension surrounding the patrol car. He pressed the talk button, but did not respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on Naomi, as though he were weighing something that extended beyond procedure. "Dispatch confirming reported missing device logged at 15:39, the voice from the radio announced. "Complainant name matches Linda Whitmore." Linda lifted her chin slightly, relief returning to her posture. "You see," she said, directing the words toward the officers, but ensuring Naomi heard every syllable. "I told you." Naomi remained still, her expression composed, but her attention sharpening. She understood how easily incomplete information could be interpreted as confirmation rather than context. Reynolds nodded once, acknowledging the update. "Thank you," he said into the radio before releasing the button. Miller glanced briefly at Naomi. "We just need to complete verification." Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Of course." Linda's confidence began returning in visible increments. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound controlled, though the underlying tension remained clear. "It's always uncomfortable when situations like this happen," Linda said, as though presenting reasonableness while preserving accusation. "But property is property." Naomi met her gaze steadily. "Accuracy is accuracy." Linda's lips tightened. "People who work hard for what they have don't take risks like this lightly." The implication hung in the air. Reynolds shifted his stance slightly, not correcting the statement. Miller avoided direct reaction, though the subtle movement of his jaw suggested awareness of the tone. Naomi spoke calmly. "I also work hard for what I have." Linda gave a faint, skeptical smile. "I'm sure you do." The phrase sounded polite. The meaning was not. One of the onlookers murmured quietly, "That sounded off." Another responded, "She's implying something." Reynolds cleared his throat lightly. "Let's keep the conversation focused," he said, though his voice lacked the firmness required to fully redirect the exchange. Linda gestured lightly toward Naomi's blazer. "It's just unusual," she continued, her voice measured but deliberate, "to see such an expensive device appear so suddenly." Naomi's posture remained straight. Technology is widely accessible. Linda tilted her head slightly. Some people prioritize appearances. Naomi did not respond immediately. She had learned long ago that certain remarks were less about conversation and more about provocation. Miller spoke quietly, attempting neutrality. "Ma'am, we are still reviewing the serial number confirmation." Naomi nodded once. Reynolds examined the phone again, rotating it slightly, as though the physical inspection might produce additional clarity. "High-end device," he remarked again. Naomi's patience remained intact, but the repetition did not go unnoticed. Linda exhaled slowly. "Officer, I simply want this resolved." Reynolds nodded. "We are working toward that." Linda shifted her weight again. "I just find it concerning how often these misunderstandings seem to occur." Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm but precise. "Misunderstandings often reflect assumptions rather than facts." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting I fabricated the loss?" "I am suggesting that certainty should follow evidence." The tension deepened. One of the observers lowered his phone slightly, whispering, "She's handling this better than most people would." Another replied, "They're still treating her like she's already guilty." Reynolds glanced briefly toward the gathering crowd, aware that the narrative was no longer confined to a single complaint. Public encounters created public interpretations, and public interpretations could travel far beyond the original moment. Ma'am, Miller said, addressing Naomi again for clarity, "Do you have any witnesses who can confirm your purchase timeline?" Naomi considered briefly. "The transaction record is stored digitally with the manufacturer. That is the most reliable form of confirmation." Linda folded her arms tighter. "Convenient." Naomi allowed a small pause before answering. "Reliable systems often appear convenient." Reynolds shifted his weight again, clearly feeling the strain between maintaining authority and ensuring fairness. Linda's frustration surfaced again. "I know what my phone looks like." Naomi held up her device slightly. "Does your phone display this engraving?" She rotated the device, revealing a subtle, personalized marking near the lower edge, a small detail most manufacturers allowed upon request. Linda hesitated. "I don't recall," she admitted. Reynolds noticed the hesitation. Miller noticed as well. Still, the momentum of accusation continued pushing forward. Linda spoke again, more quietly now. "It could still be mine." Naomi lowered the device slowly. "Serial numbers do not duplicate themselves." The words were factual, not confrontational, but they shifted the balance slightly. Reynolds's radio crackled once more. He lifted it automatically. "Dispatch update," the voice said. "Location ping indicates reported missing device may still be inside cafe premises." A subtle silence followed. Linda blinked once. What she asked quietly. Miller looked toward the cafe entrance. Reynolds pressed the radio button. "Repeat last update. Preliminary signal triangulation suggests device battery active within building interior dispatch clarified." Linda's composure wavered. "That can't be right," she said quickly. Naomi remained still, offering no reaction. The crowd murmured again, curiosity shifting direction. Reynolds lowered the radio slowly. "Well," he said carefully, "we'll verify that information." Linda's confidence flickered, but pride resisted retreat. "My phone was not inside when I left," she insisted. Naomi spoke gently. "Signal tracking is generally precise." Linda inhaled, slowly processing the possibility that her certainty might have been premature. But uncertainty rarely erases the consequences already set in motion, because reputations can be questioned in seconds, and restoring them often takes far longer. Reynolds glanced briefly at Naomi. then toward the cafe door, and the investigation that began with assumption now demanded something more difficult. Admission. For a brief moment, the sidewalk existed in a strange suspension between certainty and doubt. The quiet confidence that had fueled Linda Whitmore's accusation began to fracture under the weight of new information, yet the consequences of that certainty had already unfolded in public view. People had already stopped. Phones had already recorded. Words had already been spoken in tones that could not easily be softened. Officer Reynolds rested one hand on the edge of the patrol car again, though the gesture no longer appeared as effortless as before. He glanced toward the cafe entrance, then back at Naomi, as though recalculating how much of the situation remained within his control. "We are going to verify the signal," Reynolds said, finally his voice steady but measured. Linda shifted her weight quickly. "That must be a mistake," she said. "My phone was definitely gone." Naomi did not respond. She understood that insisting on correctness rarely accelerated acceptance. Miller touched his earpiece briefly, listening as dispatch repeated the signal data. "Battery active." Device transmitting the voice confirmed again. The words changed the energy surrounding the patrol car. Some of the tension drained from the crowd, replaced by a quiet curiosity about how the situation might resolve. Yet, even as doubt crept into the narrative, Reynolds's posture remained firm, as though unwilling to release the authority already exercised. "Ma'am," Reynolds said to Naomi, "we still need you to remain here while we confirm everything." Naomi inclined her head slightly. "I have remained cooperative." Miller stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "We appreciate that. But until we close the report, we need to maintain procedural control." The phrasing sounded neutral. The implication did not. Linda spoke quickly, her voice carrying urgency now mixed with defensiveness. "If the signal is wrong, I don't want her leaving before we figure this out." Naomi turned her head slightly toward Linda, her expression composed, but her eyes revealing the faintest trace of fatigue. "I have not attempted to leave," Naomi said quietly. Reynolds's jaw tightened slightly, as though aware that the justification for continued restriction had begun to weaken. Yet momentum remained. "Just place your hands where we can see them," he said. Naomi slowly allowed her arms to rest loosely at her sides. "I have done so consistently," she replied. Miller gestured gently toward the rear of the patrol car. "Please stand here." Naomi stepped where indicated. The crowd adjusted slightly, shifting position for a clearer view. One person whispered, "They're still treating her like a suspect." Another murmured. Even after the signal update, Linda crossed her arms tightly again, her earlier certainty now replaced with visible discomfort that she attempted to conceal behind insistence. "I just want clarity," Linda said. "That's all." Naomi spoke calmly. "Clarity often requires patience." Reynolds glanced again toward the cafe door, but did not move immediately. The delay revealed something subtle hesitation, not about facts, but about the narrative already created in public view. He could not easily undo the posture he had adopted. Authority once asserted rarely retreats gracefully. "Ma'am," Reynolds said again, addressing Naomi, "we're going to temporarily secure the situation while we verify the new information." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Secure what specifically?" Miller hesitated briefly before answering. "Standard precaution." Naomi's voice remained even. "I am not resisting." "No one said you were." Reynolds replied quickly. Yet his hand moved toward the handcuffs resting at his belt. The small metallic sound of the cuffs shifting in their holder seemed louder than expected. A quiet ripple passed through the onlookers. "Wait," someone whispered. "They're still going to cuff her." Naomi's gaze lowered briefly toward the movement, then returned to Reynolds's face. "Officer," she said calmly, "am I being detained for officer safety, or investigative necessity? Reynolds paused. The question required articulation he had not yet prepared. Just until we resolve the discrepancy, he answered finally. Naomi considered the phrasing. Temporary restraint, she said quietly. Miller spoke carefully. It's simply precautionary. Linda shifted again, her earlier confidence no longer visible, though she did not object. The subtle social pressure of having initiated the accusation seemed to anchor her in place, unwilling to reverse course too abruptly. Naomi slowly turned, placing her hands behind her back without further protest. The movement was controlled, deliberate, dignified. Even as the situation escalated beyond proportional necessity, Reynolds removed the cuffs slowly, as though aware that each small sound now carried amplified meaning. The metal clicked softly as he positioned them. Like I said, he murmured almost defensively, this is temporary. Naomi did not resist. The cool metal touched her wrist. But before the cuffs closed fully, Miller's radio crackled again with sharper urgency. Updated signal confirmed, dispatch reported. Device located inside cafe seating area. Staff currently searching. Reynolds froze for half a second, the cuff still open in his hand. The timing could not have been more precise. Or more revealing. Naomi remained still, her hands positioned calmly behind her back, waiting. Not struggling, not protesting, only observing. Because sometimes the moment that exposes imbalance arrives quietly, not through confrontation, but through contrast. Reynolds slowly lowered the cuffs, the weight of public observation now impossible to ignore. Miller exhaled subtly. Linda's composure faltered visibly. The narrative had shifted again, and this time retreat would not be silent. Because restraint once attempted without cause leaves evidence more powerful than accusation. And the quiet dignity Naomi maintained now spoke louder than any defense she could have offered. The metallic edge of the handcuffs never closed, but the moment they hovered near Naomi's wrists had already altered the atmosphere beyond repair. Even those who had initially watched with quiet curiosity now seemed more attentive, their expressions reflecting the uneasy recognition that something disproportionate had almost occurred in plain sight. Officer Reynolds slowly returned the cuffs to his belt. The movement careful, deliberate, as though attempting to minimize the sound of the metal clicking back into place. The gesture, however subtle, did not go unnoticed. Naomi gently lowered her hands from behind her back, her composure intact. She did not rub her wrists, did not express visible relief, did not offer commentary that might escalate the tension further. Instead, she allowed silence to fill the space that moments earlier had nearly been defined by restraint. Officer Miller's radio crackled again, quieter this time, as though even the voice on the other end sensed the shifting balance of the situation. Cafe staff confirming device located under seating bench, dispatch reported. Description matches complainant's reported case. Linda Whitmore inhaled sharply, her posture tightening, as though her body resisted accepting information that contradicted her earlier certainty. That doesn't make sense, she said, her voice lower now, less steady. Miller spoke carefully. Ma'am, staff have indicated the phone may have slid between the cushion and the wall. Linda's lips parted slightly, though no immediate response followed. The confidence she had displayed only minutes earlier now appeared fragile, replaced by the quiet discomfort of someone realizing that the public nature of their assumption had created consequences beyond intention. Reynolds cleared his throat lightly. "We'll confirm the recovery momentarily," he said. Naomi inclined her head slightly. "I appreciate the clarification." The words were simple, measured, free of accusation, and that absence of hostility seemed to amplify the weight of what had already occurred. One of the onlookers spoke quietly. "So she wasn't even near the phone." Another responded, "They almost cuffed her for nothing." The subtle shift in public perception became increasingly visible. Where earlier there had been suspicion, now there was evaluation not of Naomi, but of the process that had unfolded around her. Linda looked briefly toward the cafe entrance, as though hoping the situation might still correct itself in her favor. "I was certain it was missing," she said quietly. Naomi spoke calmly. "Concern is understandable. Certainty requires confirmation." Linda nodded once, though the gesture lacked conviction. Officer Reynolds shifted his weight again, his earlier composure now accompanied by visible restraint of a different kind, the careful recalibration of authority when events unfold differently than expected. "Ma'am," he said to Naomi, "thank you for your patience while we resolve this." Naomi acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. "I am aware that misunderstandings occur," she replied. Miller spoke into his radio again, requesting final confirmation from cafe staff. The seconds stretched. Traffic continued passing at the intersection, yet the small circle of attention surrounding the patrol car remained focused, unwilling to disperse until closure arrived. Because incomplete endings leave lingering questions. A cafe employee soon appeared at the doorway, holding a smartphone encased in black leather. Linda stepped forward quickly. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with relief that bordered on urgency. "That's mine." The employee approached, explaining quietly that the phone had slipped between the cushioned seat and the wall, remaining hidden from view until a staff member performed a more thorough search. Linda accepted the device, her fingers gripping it tightly, as though reclaiming certainty along with the object. Reynolds nodded once. "Glad we were able to locate it." Linda looked briefly toward Naomi, then away again, her expression caught between apology and self-protection. "Well," Linda said softly, "these things happen." Naomi's gaze remained steady. "Yes," she said quietly. "They do." But the words carried layered meaning. Because some situations do not simply happen. They unfold through decisions, through assumptions, through interpretations influenced by perception rather than fact. Miller returned Naomi's identification. "You are free to go," he said. Naomi accepted the card calmly. "Thank you," she replied. Yet the situation had already extended beyond the recovery of a misplaced device, the attempted restraint, the public scrutiny, the implication embedded in earlier remarks. All of it lingered in the awareness of those still standing nearby. Reynolds shifted his posture slightly, as though aware that resolution of the initial complaint did not fully restore equilibrium. Again, he said carefully, "We appreciate your cooperation." Naomi inclined her head once more. Cooperation had never been the issue. Perception had. Linda adjusted her handbag slowly, her movements less assured than before. She appeared to consider offering additional words, but ultimately remained silent. Because apologies spoken publicly often feel heavier than accusations delivered casually. Naomi checked the time briefly. Her scheduled call was approaching rapidly. Yet the delay had already created ripple effects she could not entirely ignore. She turned slightly, preparing to continue on her way. But before she could take more than a single step, Officer Reynolds' phone vibrated sharply in his hand. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. "Excuse me," he said, answering the call. His posture straightened instinctively. "Yes, this is Officer Reynolds," he said. A pause followed. His gaze shifted slowly toward Naomi, then sharpened. "Understood," he replied. Another pause. Miller watched carefully, sensing a shift he could not yet identify. Linda looked between them, uncertain. Reynolds listened silently, his jaw tightening as the voice on the other end continued speaking. When he finally lowered the phone slightly, the atmosphere surrounding the patrol car changed once more. Because sometimes resolution is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is only the beginning of something far more significant. And whatever Reynolds had just heard had clearly altered everything again. Officer Reynolds did not immediately speak after lowering the phone from his ear. For a brief moment, he simply stared at Naomi with an intensity that felt entirely different from the earlier suspicion that had shaped his behavior. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Where there had once been assumption, there was now calculation. "Ma'am," Reynolds said carefully, his tone more measured than before. "Could you confirm your full name again?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "Naomi Elise Carter." Reynolds nodded once, his expression tightening as though the confirmation aligned with something he had just heard. Officer Miller watched the exchange closely, sensing the quiet change in dynamic, but not yet understanding its cause. Linda Whitmore stood a few steps away, clutching her recovered phone, her earlier confidence replaced with discomfort that had begun to settle visibly across her features. The crowd, though smaller now, remained attentive enough to sense that the situation had not yet fully concluded. Reynolds spoke again, this time with noticeable restraint. "I just received a call from a federal office requesting confirmation of your identity." Naomi did not react immediately. Instead, she spoke with calm precision. "That would be expected." Miller glanced between them, his brow furrowing slightly. Expected, Naomi nodded once. "Certain communication protocols are triggered when a secured device remains inactive beyond a designated period." Reynolds absorbed the explanation, his posture straightening unconsciously as the implications began to settle. "The caller identified themselves as part of a federal coordination team," Reynolds said carefully. "They requested confirmation that you are not currently being detained." Naomi's expression remained composed. "And what did you tell them?" Reynolds hesitated briefly. "I informed them that you were part of an ongoing investigation regarding a reported stolen device." Naomi inclined her head slightly as though acknowledging a procedural inevitability. Miller shifted his stance. "What kind of coordination team are we talking about?" Naomi considered the question before answering. "One responsible for safeguarding information that requires controlled access." Linda's eyes widened slightly, though she said nothing. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "The individual on the phone requested to speak with you directly." Naomi extended her hand calmly. "You may pass the phone." Reynolds handed over the device carefully, as though aware that the interaction now carried weight beyond ordinary procedure. Naomi placed the phone near her ear. "Yes," she said quietly. A brief pause followed. "Yes, this is Naomi Carter." Another pause. Her tone remained steady. "No, the device has remained secure." Miller and Reynolds exchanged a brief glance. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Naomi listened silently for several seconds before responding again. "No, the situation did not compromise data integrity." Her phrasing caused Miller's attention to sharpen further. Naomi continued listening. "Yes," she said. "I understand the concern." Her eyes moved briefly toward the officers before returning to stillness. No information was exposed. Another pause. "I will proceed according to standard protocol." She listened again. "Yes." A final pause. "Understood." Naomi lowered the phone slowly and handed it back to Reynolds. The silence that followed felt heavier than the earlier tension. Reynolds spoke carefully. "They requested assurance that your device had not been accessed by unauthorized individuals." Naomi nodded once. "That is correct." Miller studied her expression more closely now. "May I ask what kind of information requires that level of monitoring?" Naomi answered calmly. Information that cannot be replaced once compromised. Linda's grip on her own phone tightened. Reynolds cleared his throat lightly. The caller also emphasized the importance of uninterrupted device custody. Naomi inclined her head slightly. That is consistent with protocol. Miller spoke cautiously. Are we dealing with federal property? Naomi considered the phrasing. The device itself belongs to me, Reynolds added quietly. But the data does not. Naomi did not confirm directly. She did not deny it either. Linda's earlier composure now seemed distant, replaced with visible unease that deepened with every carefully measured word exchanged between Naomi and the officers. One of the remaining onlookers whispered softly, "What kind of data needs federal monitoring?" Another responded quietly, "Something serious." Reynolds adjusted his stance again, the subtle shift revealing growing awareness that the situation had extended far beyond a misplaced phone complaint. "Ma'am," Reynolds said carefully, "the individual on the phone mentioned that your work relates to national infrastructure security." Naomi did not react emotionally. "I provide technical consultation," she said simply. Miller exhaled slowly. "That sounds significant." "Significance depends on context," Naomi replied. Reynolds glanced briefly toward Linda, then back to Naomi. "They also indicated that delays in your schedule could impact ongoing coordination." Naomi checked the time briefly. "That is accurate." Linda finally spoke, her voice quieter than at any previous moment. "I didn't realize—" She did not complete the sentence. Because the realization unfolding now carried implications she had not anticipated when she first raised her voice outside the cafe, Reynolds spoke again more carefully than before. "For documentation purposes, we will need to note that the device remained continuously in your possession." Naomi nodded once. "That is correct." Miller shifted slightly. "And that no unauthorized access occurred." Naomi met his gaze calmly. "That is also correct." Reynolds exhaled, slowly absorbing the weight of what the call had introduced into the situation. The earlier accusation now appeared increasingly distant from the reality forming in front of them. Linda looked down briefly at the phone, now firmly in her own hands, as though questioning the confidence that had led her to escalate suspicion so quickly. The crowd had grown quieter now, sensing that the narrative had shifted once again. Not through confrontation, but through information. Reynolds finally spoke with measured professionalism. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Carter." Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Clarity is often beneficial," she replied. But the shift in tone surrounding her was unmistakable now, because authority recognizes hierarchy. And sometimes respect appears only after relevance becomes undeniable. The sidewalk that had once framed accusation now held something else entirely. Awareness. And the realization that the woman who had been seconds away from restraint had been trusted with responsibilities far greater than anyone present had assumed. The air on the sidewalk had changed in a way that could not easily be reversed. Only minutes earlier, Naomi Carter had stood in the center of suspicion. Her presence questioned her ownership, doubted her dignity, quietly challenged under the guise of routine procedure. Now the same officers who had scrutinized her every movement were measuring each word carefully, aware that the situation had evolved beyond a simple misunderstanding involving a misplaced phone. Officer Reynolds held his phone lower, now his posture noticeably more formal than before. Authority had not left his stance, but it had adjusted itself, as though recognizing that the context surrounding Naomi Carter required a different level of consideration. "For the record," Reynolds said carefully, The caller identified your role as part of a federal cybersecurity task force. Naomi did not immediately confirm or deny the statement. I operate as an external consultant, she replied calmly. My work supports infrastructure protection. Miller's expression sharpened with understanding. Infrastructure as in financial systems, Naomi considered the phrasing. Among others. The ambiguity of her answer did not reduce its significance. If anything, it deepened it. Linda Whitmore stood silently now, her earlier insistence replaced by visible discomfort. She shifted her weight slightly, as though attempting to reduce her presence without physically leaving the scene. The recovered phone felt heavier in her hands, no longer simply a misplaced device, but a reminder of how quickly certainty can transform into consequence. Reynolds cleared his throat lightly. The caller also indicated that your device contains encrypted communication tools. Naomi nodded once. That is correct. Miller glanced at the phone in Naomi's hand with new awareness. And those tools are monitored remotely. Yes. Continuously. Yes. Linda exhaled slowly, her gaze lowering momentarily as the implications began to settle. Reynolds spoke again, this time with clear restraint. They emphasized that any interruption in device custody could trigger internal review procedures. Naomi's expression remained composed. That is standard. Miller shifted his stance slightly. So if the phone had been taken into evidence... Naomi allowed a small pause. The interruption would have required documentation. Reynolds absorbed the statement, understanding the understated significance. And that documentation would involve federal oversight, he concluded. Naomi did not contradict him. Linda finally spoke, her voice noticeably softer. I didn't realize the situation could become complicated. Naomi looked toward her briefly, her gaze calm, but not unkind. Many situations become complicated when assumptions precede questions. Linda nodded faintly, the movement subtle, but sincere. The remaining onlookers had grown quieter, sensing that the unfolding conversation now carried layers of importance beyond public spectacle. Some lowered their phones, no longer interested in capturing conflict, but aware they had witnessed something revealing about how quickly perception can mislead judgment. Reynolds adjusted the notepad in his hand, his movements precise. For clarification, he said the caller asked that we confirm no physical search of the device occurred. That is correct, Naomi replied. Miller spoke cautiously. We did not access any internal data. Naomi inclined her head slightly. That is consistent with proper protocol. Reynolds nodded once. They also asked whether any attempt was made to restrict your movement. A brief silence followed. Naomi did not respond immediately. Miller glanced at Reynolds. Reynolds inhaled slowly. We did not complete any physical restraint, he said carefully. Naomi acknowledged the statement with a neutral expression. The distinction is noted, she said calmly. Linda's fingers tightened slightly around her own phone, because attempted action often carries weight even when not completed. Reynolds continued writing, briefly documenting the interaction with deliberate precision. The caller requested assurance that no escalation compromised your schedule, he added. Naomi glanced briefly at the time displayed on her device. I am still within acceptable delay parameters, she said. Miller exhaled quietly. This situation developed quickly. Naomi met his gaze. Situations often do. Linda stepped slightly closer, her voice tentative now. I genuinely believed the phone had been taken. Naomi regarded her calmly. Concern is understandable. Accusation requires certainty. Linda nodded again, though the gesture appeared heavier now. Reynolds closed his notepad carefully. We will document the resolution accordingly, he said. Naomi inclined her head once more. I appreciate the clarification, but the exchange no longer resembled a simple resolution of misplaced property. It had evolved into a quiet demonstration of how easily perception can shape outcomes when context remains unseen. Miller glanced toward the cafe entrance again. Staff confirmed the phone had slid behind the seat cushion, he said, reinforcing the factual conclusion. Linda exhaled slowly. I should have checked more carefully. Naomi did not respond immediately. Because acknowledgement, while necessary, does not always repair impact. Reynolds spoke again, his voice measured. Ms. Carter, thank you for your cooperation throughout the process. Naomi inclined her head slightly. Professional clarity benefits everyone involved, she replied. The phrasing remained calm, but the meaning carried weight. Miller shifted slightly as though considering whether additional words were appropriate. Instead, he simply nodded. Linda hesitated, then spoke quietly. I regret the inconvenience. Naomi met her gaze briefly. Understanding is always valuable. The sidewalk slowly began returning to its usual rhythm. Conversations resumed. Footsteps continued. The city, indifferent yet observant, moved forward as it always did. But for those who had witnessed the exchange, the moment lingered. Because authority had nearly acted without sufficient evidence, because dignity had been tested unnecessarily, because assumptions had guided action faster than facts. Reynolds stepped back, slightly signaling closure of the report. You are free to continue your day, he said. Naomi nodded once. Yet, as she turned slightly preparing to leave, Miller's radio vibrated again, this time not with urgency, but with formal clarity. A message flagged with priority clearance. Reynolds glanced at the screen briefly. His expression changed once more. Because sometimes confirmation does not end a situation. Sometimes it elevates it. And whatever appeared on the display now carried implications that extended beyond a single misunderstanding on a Chicago sidewalk. Officer Reynolds read the notification twice before fully lowering the device in his hand. His posture, once guided by routine authority, now reflected something quieter but far more careful. It was not fear. It was recognition, the kind that arrives when new information reframes everything that came before it. Ms. Carter Reynolds said, his voice more formal than at any previous moment. We've just received confirmation from the Federal Coordination Office. Naomi paused, but did not turn immediately. Her calm remained consistent, as though the shift unfolding around her had been anticipated long before this afternoon ever began. Miller watched Reynolds closely. Confirmation of what exactly, he asked. Reynolds chose his words with precision. Of her professional clearance level. Linda Whitmore looked up quickly, the tension in her expression tightening once again. The phrase carried implications she did not fully understand, but the seriousness in Reynolds' tone made the significance unmistakable. Naomi turned slowly to face them again. Her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. Reynolds continued carefully. We were informed that Ms. Carter serves as a contracted cybersecurity specialist supporting federal investigative operations. Miller exhaled quietly. Federal investigative operations? Naomi nodded once. I assist in protecting digital infrastructure from unauthorized intrusion. Reynolds added the caller specified that her current assignments involve sensitive communications monitoring. Linda's grip on her recovered phone tightened slightly. What kind of communications, she asked before she could stop herself. Naomi answered calmly. Communications that cannot be publicly discussed. The quiet certainty in her voice left little room for further speculation. Miller's posture shifted subtly, the earlier informality replaced by professional restraint. Does this involve law enforcement systems? He asked cautiously. Naomi considered the phrasing carefully. It involves systems relied upon by multiple agencies. Reynolds glanced briefly at the crowd, aware that the conversation had already revealed more than typically discussed in public settings. The Coordination Office requested confirmation that no interruption compromised her device's chain of custody, Reynolds said. Naomi inclined her head slightly. The device remained in my possession. Miller nodded slowly, processing the implications. Meaning the data remained secure. Yes, Naomi confirmed. Linda shifted her weight, the earlier confidence that had fueled her accusation now replaced by visible discomfort that deepened with every passing second. I truly believed the phone had been taken, she said quietly. Naomi regarded her calmly. Belief often arrives faster than verification. Linda nodded faintly. Reynolds continued speaking, his tone precise. We were also informed that Ms. Carter's current consultation involves encrypted network vulnerability assessment. Miller's brow furrowed slightly. That sounds classified. Naomi did not respond directly, because classification rarely requires confirmation. Reynolds lowered his voice slightly. The caller indicated that her work contributes to preventing large-scale data breaches affecting public infrastructure. Linda inhaled slowly, the weight of her earlier assumptions becoming increasingly evident. One of the remaining onlookers whispered quietly, "So she's basically protecting systems we all rely on." Another murmured, "And they almost cuffed her." The words lingered in the air, not confrontational, but unmistakably reflective. Miller spoke carefully. "Were you traveling between assignments today?" Naomi nodded once. "Yes. And the device contains active project material." "Yes." Reynolds exhaled slowly, absorbing the confirmation. The coordination office emphasized that any unauthorized review attempt could have triggered security protocols, he said. Naomi inclined her head slightly. "That would be consistent." Linda's gaze lowered toward the pavement briefly. "I had no idea," she said softly. Naomi's voice remained even. Context is often incomplete. Reynolds closed the notification screen on his device, his movements measured. For documentation clarity, he said, "We will include notation confirming that Ms. Carter was not in violation of any statute." Naomi nodded once, "And that the complaint regarding stolen property has been resolved without evidence of wrongdoing." Linda swallowed quietly, her posture reflecting the growing awareness of how quickly perception can escalate into public consequence. "I regret the misunderstanding," she said carefully. Naomi met her gaze briefly. "Misunderstandings can carry impact beyond intention," she replied. The phrasing was calm, but the meaning resonated. Miller spoke cautiously. The coordination office also mentioned that delays affecting Ms. Carter's schedule may influence operational timing. Naomi checked the time briefly. "I remain within acceptable margin," she said. Reynolds nodded slowly, acknowledging both the professionalism and restraint Naomi had demonstrated throughout the encounter. "Your cooperation has been noted," he said. Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Cooperation ensures clarity." Linda adjusted the strap of her handbag, her earlier composure now replaced by visible humility. "I hope this situation has not caused serious disruption," she said quietly. Naomi answered with measured calm. "Disruption is often temporary. Perspective is longer lasting." The statement settled over the small gathering like a quiet reminder, because the moment had never been solely about a phone. It had revealed something more subtle. How easily assumptions attach themselves to appearance. How quickly suspicion finds direction when perception feels convenient. How dignity often requires defense, even when no wrongdoing exists. Reynolds finally stepped back, signaling closure of the encounter. "Ms. Carter," he said respectfully, "you are free to proceed." Naomi nodded once, but before she turned fully to leave, Miller spoke again. "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "your composure throughout this situation was noted." Naomi acknowledged the comment with a small nod. "Professional consistency is important in every environment," she replied. Linda remained still, clearly considering whether additional words were appropriate. "I am sorry," she said, finally, her voice quiet but sincere. Naomi regarded her calmly. "I hope future certainty waits for evidence," she said gently. The statement was neither harsh nor dismissive, simply factual. Reynolds adjusted his posture once more. The authority he represented had not disappeared, but it had been reminded. Because respect offered early prevents correction later. Naomi turned slightly, preparing to continue her day. Yet the quiet significance of the moment remained present in every observer who had witnessed it unfold. The woman once viewed through suspicion now stood revealed through context. And context once known cannot easily be ignored. Because truth does not raise its voice. It simply stands and waits. The atmosphere on the sidewalk no longer resembled the tense confrontation that had first drawn attention. What remained instead was something quieter, but far more revealing: the subtle recalibration of power that occurs when assumption collides with fact. The small group of bystanders who had witnessed the encounter seemed reluctant to disperse completely, as though aware they had observed more than a simple misunderstanding. They had seen how quickly authority could lean in one direction, and how abruptly it could correct itself. Officer Reynolds adjusted the collar of his uniform slightly, the gesture small but noticeable. Professional composure had returned, yet it carried a different tone now, one shaped by awareness rather than certainty. "For clarity," Reynolds said carefully, "we will be submitting a report documenting the sequence of events." Naomi inclined her head slightly. Documentation often ensures accountability. Miller shifted his stance, glancing briefly at the dispersing crowd. The coordination office requested confirmation that the interaction concluded without compromise to operational material, he added. Naomi responded calmly. That condition has been met. Linda Whitmore remained near the cafe entrance, her earlier confidence now replaced by visible reflection. The recovered phone rested in her hands, no longer a symbol of loss, but of how quickly perception can distort reality when certainty arrives too soon. "I want to say again," Linda began quietly, "I regret the misunderstanding." Naomi regarded her calmly. "Regret is meaningful when followed by awareness," she said. Linda nodded faintly. "I should have verified more carefully," she admitted. Naomi's voice remained gentle but firm. "Verification protects everyone involved." Officer Reynolds glanced toward Miller briefly, then returned his attention to Naomi. "The coordination office also indicated that your current assignment involves protecting access points tied to financial networks." Naomi considered the phrasing carefully. "My work focuses on identifying vulnerabilities before they can be exploited." Miller's brow furrowed slightly. "Meaning you prevent breaches before they occur." "That is the objective," Naomi confirmed. Linda listened silently, the weight of her earlier assumptions becoming increasingly apparent as context filled the gaps once occupied by certainty. Reynolds continued. "We were advised that any disruption affecting your work schedule could potentially delay preventative system updates." Naomi nodded once. "Time-sensitive environments require continuity." Miller exhaled quietly. "So this situation could have impacted ongoing protective measures." Naomi responded calmly. "Indirectly, yes." Linda lowered her gaze briefly, absorbing the broader implications. "I didn't realize something so important could be affected," she said quietly. Naomi met her gaze. "Many important processes remain invisible until interruption occurs," she said. The statement carried quiet weight, because often the individuals responsible for safeguarding systems are rarely recognized until disruption reveals the value of their work. One of the remaining onlookers spoke softly to a companion. She protects systems we all rely on. Another replied, and still had to prove she owned her own phone. The contrast did not require emphasis. It spoke for itself. Officer Reynolds closed his notepad, his movements deliberate. For transparency, he said, "We will note that Ms. Carter maintained full cooperation throughout the encounter." Naomi inclined her head slightly. "Professional interaction benefits all parties," she said. Miller nodded once. Linda adjusted her handbag slowly, her posture reflecting quiet humility. "I hope this experience has not caused undue inconvenience," she said carefully. Naomi responded evenly. "Moments of misunderstanding often reveal opportunities for growth." Linda accepted the statement with a faint nod. "Because growth rarely occurs without discomfort." Reynolds shifted his stance once more. "Ms. Carter, the coordination office requested confirmation that you are able to proceed without further delay." "I am able to continue my schedule," Naomi replied. Miller glanced briefly toward the intersection where traffic moved steadily, indifferent to the significance of what had just unfolded nearby. "Your professionalism today has been noted," he said. Naomi acknowledged the statement quietly. "Professional consistency is essential," she replied. Linda hesitated briefly before speaking again. "I will be more careful in the future," she said. Naomi regarded her calmly. "Careful observation often prevents unnecessary escalation," she said. The phrasing remained neutral, but the meaning resonated clearly. Because escalation had never truly been about a phone. It had been about perception, assumption, expectation, and the quiet influence of bias operating beneath conscious awareness. Officer Reynolds straightened slightly. "We appreciate your patience today," he said. Naomi inclined her head once more. "Patience is often required when clarity takes time," she replied. The remaining bystanders began to disperse slowly, their conversations quieter, now reflective rather than curious. Because witnessing a moment of imbalance corrected in real time often leaves a lasting impression. Not dramatic, but meaningful. Linda stepped back slightly, her expression thoughtful, as though replaying the sequence of events in her mind with new perspective. Reynolds offered a final nod. "Ms. Carter, we wish you a productive remainder of your day." Naomi returned the nod. "Thank you, officer." She turned slightly, preparing to continue forward, her posture unchanged from the moment the encounter first began. Steady, composed, unshaken. Because dignity does not require validation to exist. It remains present even when questioned, even when challenged, even when forced to wait for recognition. As Naomi walked away, the late afternoon light reflected softly against the glass buildings once more, the city continuing its rhythm as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet for those who had witnessed the encounter, something had shifted. Awareness often arrives quietly, but once present, it rarely disappears. Because power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it reveals itself through restraint, through composure, through the refusal to allow assumption to define identity. And in that quiet recalibration, the balance had unmistakably changed. By early evening, the brief confrontation outside the cafe had already begun traveling far beyond the Chicago sidewalk where it occurred. In a world where moments could be captured, uploaded, and shared within seconds, the footage recorded by several bystanders quickly found its way onto social media platforms. The clips were short, some only 30 seconds long, yet they contained enough context to spark discussion across thousands of viewers who had never stepped foot on that street. One video showed the moment Officer Reynolds reached for the handcuffs. Another captured Naomi standing calmly while questions about ownership circled her like quiet accusations. A third clip included Linda Whitmore's early insistence that the phone must have been taken. None of the videos contained the full story, but together they revealed enough to raise a question many viewers had seen before. Why had suspicion moved so quickly in one direction? The comments beneath the videos multiplied rapidly. Why was she treated like a suspect before proof? They almost cuffed her without evidence. This happens too often. The footage did not exaggerate events. It did not require dramatic editing. The calm composure Naomi maintained throughout the interaction spoke more powerfully than any narration could have added. Within hours, the Internal Review Department of the Chicago Police Department received multiple inquiries regarding the incident. Public encounters involving procedural decisions often required evaluation, especially when video documentation created a permanent record of each step taken. Sergeant Alicia Monroe was among the first supervisors to review the initial report submitted by Officer Reynolds. She watched the footage carefully, pausing several times to examine tone, body language, and sequence of escalation. Procedure itself had not been entirely violated, but perception mattered, and perception could influence public trust. Monroe requested clarification regarding the decision point at which restraint had nearly occurred. Reynolds' written report described the encounter as an evolving investigation involving a reported theft complaint. Yet the video revealed something more subtle. Hesitation applied unevenly, and hesitation often invites scrutiny. By the following morning, local media outlets had begun referencing the incident as part of broader discussions surrounding implicit bias and public encounters. Several commentators emphasized Naomi's composure, noting how restraint and professionalism had prevented the situation from escalating further. Naomi herself had not posted any statement online. She had not commented publicly. She had not described the encounter from her perspective. Her silence drew its own form of attention. Because restraint in the face of public curiosity often suggests confidence in the strength of facts alone. Meanwhile, within the department, Sergeant Monroe initiated a procedural review designed not as punishment, but as evaluation of training protocols related to assumption-based encounters. Officer Miller provided supplemental documentation confirming that no search of Naomi's device had occurred and that no formal detention had been completed. Yet the near restraint remained part of the record. Moments that almost happen often carry as much weight as those that do. Linda Whitmore, for her part, spent much of the following day reflecting on how quickly her certainty had formed. The recovered phone now felt like a reminder rather than reassurance. She replayed the moment she had first called out to Naomi, recognizing how little evidence she had truly possessed. Embarrassment can be uncomfortable, but awareness often begins there. Linda contacted the cafe manager to request confirmation of the exact location where the phone had been found. The explanation remained simple. The device had slipped between the upholstered seat and the wall panel, hidden from immediate view. An ordinary accident. Yet the response it triggered had been anything but ordinary. Within professional circles, Naomi's colleagues remained unsurprised by her composure. Those familiar with high-stakes environments understood that calm decision-making often develops through repeated exposure to pressure. Her supervisor, Daniel Harper, sent a brief message acknowledging the situation. Glad to see protocols remained intact. Appreciate your professionalism. Naomi responded simply, continuity maintained. For her, the priority had always been data integrity and operational consistency. Personal discomfort had been secondary. Yet the public dimension of the encounter revealed something broader than personal inconvenience. It revealed how quickly perception can shift when identity intersects with expectation. By late afternoon, an internal memorandum circulated within the department recommending additional scenario-based training focused on maintaining investigative neutrality until evidence confirmed direction. The memo did not mention Naomi by name, but the context was clear. Moments of public visibility often accelerate institutional reflection. Not because one incident defines an entire system, but because repeated patterns demand awareness. On social media, discussions continued evolving. Some viewers expressed frustration. Others expressed appreciation for the calm resolution. Many simply noted how easily the situation could have unfolded differently. Because escalation often depends not on intention, but on momentum. Naomi herself continued her work without interruption, attending her scheduled virtual briefing that same evening. Her colleagues focused on project updates rather than public attention, understanding that operational continuity remained the priority. Yet the encounter had quietly demonstrated something important. Professional authority does not always announce itself visibly. Competence does not always match expectation. And dignity does not require validation to exist. By the end of the day, the videos had accumulated hundreds of thousands of views, not because of confrontation, but because of contrast. A calm presence beside raised assumption, measured words beside premature certainty, and the reminder that respect when offered early prevents correction later. The sidewalk where the encounter occurred looked no different the following morning. People passed the cafe without noticing anything unusual. Yet the moment that unfolded, there had already extended beyond its physical location. Because awareness travels, and once awareness arrives, it changes the way future moments unfold. 3 days after the incident outside the cafe, the Chicago Police Department released a brief public statement acknowledging that the interaction involving Naomi Carter had undergone internal review. The language of the statement was measured and procedural, carefully constructed to maintain professionalism, while recognizing the public concern that had grown around the situation. After reviewing available footage and officer documentation, the statement read, "The department has determined that no legal violation was committed by Miss Naomi Carter. The reported missing property was located within the original premises, confirming that no theft occurred. The department remains committed to continued training focused on maintaining investigative neutrality and minimizing assumption-based escalation." The wording was formal, yet its meaning was unmistakable. Procedure alone was not enough. Perception mattered. Trust mattered. And the presence of video documentation had accelerated the need for institutional reflection. Officer Reynolds and Officer Miller were both required to attend a supplemental training session focused on bias awareness and proportional response during public encounters. The review did not label either officer as malicious, but it did highlight how quickly investigative posture can intensify when assumptions guide early interpretation. Training Supervisor Dr. Evelyn Grant addressed the group of officers during the session. "Bias is not always loud," she explained. "Often it operates quietly, influencing decisions before we consciously recognize its presence. Our responsibility is not simply to follow procedure, but to ensure that procedure is applied evenly without premature conclusion." Several officers nodded thoughtfully. Moments captured publicly often influence future decision-making more strongly than internal policy alone. Meanwhile, local news coverage began shifting from the incident itself toward broader discussion about perception and professionalism in public service roles. Commentators emphasized Naomi's restraint as a key factor preventing unnecessary escalation. One editorial noted composure should never be required to secure fair treatment. Respect should be standard, not earned through demonstration. The sentence resonated widely across online platforms. Linda Whitmore chose to issue a written apology, though she avoided public interviews. Her statement shared through her professional network acknowledged that her assumption had been premature. "I regret allowing urgency to replace careful verification," she wrote. "This experience has reminded me of the importance of questioning my own certainty before questioning others." The apology did not erase the moment, but it reflected awareness. And awareness often marks the beginning of meaningful change. Naomi did not publicly respond to the apology. Her focus remained directed toward her work, where continuity mattered more than commentary. Within her professional environment, the situation had already been evaluated according to a different framework. Operational integrity had remained intact, data had not been compromised, and no interruption had affected the broader project timeline. Her supervisor, Daniel Harper, acknowledged the conclusion of the internal review with a short message, "Glad to see resolution documented. Your professionalism reflects well on the entire team." Naomi's reply remained characteristically concise, professional standards maintained. Her approach to the situation had never been driven by the need for recognition, only by the need for stability. Yet the broader impact of the encounter continued unfolding in subtle ways. Universities referenced the incident in discussions about implicit bias. Professional training organizations cited the scenario as an example of how perception influences escalation. Several public policy forums referenced the footage when discussing the importance of balanced decision-making under pressure. The incident had become part of a larger conversation, not because it was unique, but because it was familiar, and familiarity often reveals patterns. Officer Miller later reflected privately on the moment when the handcuffs had nearly been applied. In hindsight, he recognized how quickly momentum had guided the interaction toward unnecessary escalation. Experience teaches many lessons, but reflection ensures those lessons remain present. Officer Reynolds requested additional voluntary training hours beyond those required by the department. His decision reflected awareness that authority carries responsibility extending beyond immediate compliance with protocol. Trust, once questioned publicly, requires consistent demonstration to restore. Linda Whitmore, for her part, made a quiet donation to a community legal education initiative focused on promoting awareness of civil rights protections during public encounters. Her decision remained private, but intentional, because growth often occurs away from public attention. Naomi continued her work, as she always had, precisely quietly, without unnecessary display. Her role required focus on systems larger than individual recognition, on safeguards designed to prevent disruptions most people would never see. She attended meetings, reviewed encrypted logs, evaluated system vulnerabilities, maintained the steady discipline required for high-stakes environments. The incident outside the cafe became a reference point, but not a defining one, because dignity does not depend on external validation. It exists regardless of recognition. Yet the broader lesson continued spreading through conversations far beyond that single sidewalk. Respect offered early prevents correction later. Assumptions made quickly often require longer time to repair, and fairness applied consistently prevents moments that should never occur at all. By the end of the week, the footage that once circulated widely began gradually fading from public attention, replaced by new stories, new discussions, new moments competing for awareness. But those who had watched closely understood something important had been revealed. Authority carries influence. Influence carries responsibility. And responsibility requires awareness of how easily perception can shape outcome. The incident did not end dramatically. No courtroom verdict, no public confrontation, only quiet adjustment, quiet reflection, quiet improvement. Because meaningful justice does not always arrive through spectacle. Sometimes it appears through correction, through learning, through the willingness to recognize that fairness must exist before conflict begins. And in that quiet recalibration, progress, however gradual, had unmistakably begun. 2 weeks after the incident, outside the Chicago cafe, the sidewalk looked exactly as it always had. People hurried past the same glass windows, conversations overlapped in the same indistinct rhythm, and the city continued forward with the steady momentum that rarely pauses long enough to acknowledge the stories quietly unfolding within it. Nothing about the physical space suggested that anything meaningful had occurred there. Yet for many who had watched the video, shared the discussion, or reflected on the encounter privately, something had shifted in the way they observed the world around them. Awareness rarely announces its arrival. It settles gradually. It alters perception. It introduces hesitation before assumption. And hesitation, when guided by reflection, often prevents harm. Naomi Carter returned to the same cafe one morning, not out of necessity, but out of quiet intention. She entered without hesitation, her posture unchanged, her calm presence as steady as it had been during the encounter that had briefly placed her at the center of public scrutiny. The barista recognized her immediately, offering a polite nod of acknowledgement that required no words. Moments do not always need to be revisited aloud. Sometimes acknowledgement exists simply through respectful presence. Naomi ordered her coffee as usual, her voice, even her focus, undisturbed. She did not appear concerned about whether anyone recognized her. Because dignity does not perform for validation. It exists independently. Outside the city moved, as it always did, a constant exchange of destinations and responsibilities, individuals navigating private concerns, invisible to those passing nearby. Yet within many workplaces, classrooms, and community discussions, the incident had become a reference point, not as spectacle, but as illustration. An illustration of how quickly perception can shape response, how easily assumption can escalate interaction, how important it is to pause long enough to ask questions before drawing conclusions. At a local university, a professor referenced the scenario during a seminar on decision-making psychology. Bias often operates silently, she explained to her students. It does not always appear as intentional harm. Often it appears as confidence in incomplete information. The students listened carefully, because examples grounded in reality resonate more deeply than abstract theory. Elsewhere, a professional training workshop incorporated a brief segment analyzing the moment when the interaction nearly escalated unnecessarily. The instructor emphasized the importance of proportional response. Authority must remain anchored in evidence, he explained. Otherwise, escalation becomes self-justifying rather than fact-based. Participants took notes quietly, because responsibility requires continuous refinement. Linda Whitmore, reflecting privately, found herself observing her own reactions more carefully in everyday situations. The discomfort she had experienced became a quiet teacher, one that encouraged greater patience before allowing certainty to guide interpretation. Growth rarely feels comfortable, but it often begins there. Officer Miller approached subsequent public interactions with renewed attentiveness, consciously ensuring that procedural steps remained balanced with objective observation. Experience alone does not guarantee improvement. Reflection ensures improvement remains possible. Officer Reynolds, too, found himself pausing more deliberately during investigative encounters, allowing additional space for context to emerge before forming conclusions. Authority applied carefully strengthens trust. Trust strengthens cooperation. Cooperation prevents escalation. The ripple effect of a single moment often travels further than expected. Naomi herself did not speak publicly about the encounter. Her work required discretion. Her role required focus. And her understanding of human behavior reminded her that change rarely occurs through confrontation alone. It occurs through awareness repeated often enough to reshape instinct. During one of her regular project briefings, a junior analyst asked her how she maintained composure under pressure. Naomi responded simply, clarity remains easier when emotion does not guide decision. The answer reflected experience developed long before the sidewalk incident had ever occurred, because composure is not passive. It is practiced. It is intentional. It is powerful precisely because it refuses to mirror imbalance. Weeks passed. The video gradually disappeared from trending lists. Public attention moved elsewhere. Yet those who had taken time to reflect carried something forward. A reminder that appearance does not define capability. That dignity should not require defense. That fairness must exist at the beginning of interaction, not arrive later as correction. On an ordinary afternoon, Naomi finished another meeting and stepped once again into the steady rhythm of the city. The skyline reflected light across the river, casting familiar patterns across buildings that had witnessed countless stories unfold quietly beneath them. Her phone rested in her hand, its surface reflecting the movement of clouds drifting slowly overhead. Technology connected systems, but awareness connected people. And when awareness expands, behavior gradually follows, because progress rarely arrives as sudden transformation. It arrives through small adjustments repeated consistently, through conversations that encourage reflection, through decisions made with greater patience than before, through recognition that dignity belongs equally to every individual, regardless of expectation. Naomi paused briefly at a crosswalk as the pedestrian signal changed. The city moved forward, and so did she, not defined by the moment that had questioned her presence, but strengthened by the clarity it revealed. Because respect offered freely prevents harm unnecessarily created. Because fairness applied consistently prevents correction later required. Because awareness once gained has the quiet power to reshape the future. And in that quiet power, change had already begun.